So good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the quarterly consortium update and actually the end of the year update. And I think we should get started because we have a lot of things to cover. So this session will be recorded and we'll send the deck out to people who have registered for the session. The deck, by the way, is about 60 slides. I'm only going to show maybe 20 or 25 of those. So there's a lot of background and detail in the deck that you'll get that we probably won't have time to talk about. The other thing is Kelly has put links in the deck to additional information or more details. For those of you who are members, you can access the wiki site for more information on some of the team meetings or some of the topics we've talked about. So hopefully what we'll get through is a summary of this past year's work. It's been a very busy year, and a little bit of discussion on what we plan to do in 2016 and some upcoming events. So that's the plan. The first big news from 2015, and now my deck is not advancing, is 2 new board members. So Stephanie Gloden from Apollo and Doris Jurison from DTCC, formerly OMGO. Doris has been a member with the consortium for many years and managed an excellent adoption of KCS at OMGO. OMGO was recently bought by DTCC. And that's a financial institution. Stephanie has been a longtime supporter of KCS and in fact is promoting the adoption of KCS across the entire organization at the Apollo Education Group. So 2 great advocates for the work we do, and from 2 very different industries. So Apollo being education, best known for the University of Phoenix, but they have about 15 other universities that they manage under the Apollo group. And then DTCC, which is in the business of processing bank transactions. So it's not a household name. It's kind of in the background of the financial community, but used by almost every bank in the world. So it's great to have, one, people who are tremendous advocates for the work we do, and also people who come from industries that are a little different than just high tech. So welcome Stephanie and Doris to the board of directors. So getting things done, we've gotten a lot done this year, and it's in large part because of the courage of the members to try new and different things. So innovation is about doing things nobody else has done before. And that takes a certain amount of courage because there's always a certain amount of uncertainty. And in fact, for the most innovative things that we come up with, which are often kind of start off as crazy ideas, the first person that tries it, the first organization or team that tries it, inevitably will learn a lot, but it won't work. And typically the second group that tries it will land in a ditch. It typically takes 3 attempts to figure out how some new idea actually works in operations. And so the consortium work moves about at the speed that the members are willing to try new and different things. So we've had a lot of experimentation this year from the members. So I'll give you some insight into some of that activity. We ran 6 to 8 websites. We typically run 6 to 8 web sessions per year. I think we had about 8 or 9 last year, and those are usually an hour and a half on specific topics. Our team meetings are working sessions, usually 12 to 24 people, also on a specific topic, but it's where we actually explore some of these ideas and hear about the lessons learned from members and their attempts to try some of these new things. We typically do 6 to 8 a year. We did 10 last year, 10 team meetings, which is quite a lot. And 2 of them, for the first time, were in Europe. We're getting a lot of interest in KCS from the European community. We do an annual leadership committee meeting, which we just held, was that just last week, I think, in Colorado. And the leadership committee meeting is the sponsor and benefactor level members get together and talk about the work we've done over the past year and more importantly, help us scope and define the work we want to do next year. So the list of events that we have later in the presentation has all been reviewed, and some specifics have been added by that group of folks. Then the annual member summit. We do one of those every year. There's one coming up in April in Orlando, Florida. We'll tell you a little bit more about that. And then the annual members executive summit, which is, we do that once a year, usually in the fall. And this past year we did it in Massachusetts and had a great conversation with Doc Searles around trust and organizations becoming customer-centric. And then we also offer member services, briefings, workshops, assessments on all the work we're doing. So that's how members engage with us. That's how we get our work done, is through all of those various events. We've organized the initiatives into five initiatives, and they all intersect and overlap. They are all synergistic with each other, but it helps us organize the conversation and put a little focus around the events that we run and particularly the team meetings. So we talk about 5 initiatives. The first and the oldest is KCS, Success and Evolution, and that really has two aspects to it. One is the evolution of KCS around, and coming up with what we're going to publish in KCS V6. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But also a renewed focus on KCS success and the adoption. And we've had a number of members do some very interesting things and report back on successes and lessons learned on the Evolve loop over the past year. And we'll be focusing on that in the KCS V6 and updating and strengthening the definition of the Evolve loop. So that's KCS, and then intelligence swarming is the idea that the old model of level 1, level 2, level 3, a streaming model for support is not the best way to align resources to work, particularly as the work starts to shift from mostly known to mostly new. So as people get good at KCS and good at self-service, promoting and enabling customer self-service, then the nature of the work in the support center starts to shift from mostly known, which is where it is still today across the industry, to mostly new, at which point you need to rethink how you align resources to work, because how you solve new problems is a collaboration process. So intelligence swarming is collaboration on steroids, and what makes it intelligent is people profiles. So this is a concept we've been talking about for probably 13 or 14 years. And in the last 5 years, we've had a handful of members actually doing it, and there are a number of case studies on the intelligence swarming webpage. So we're learning about the principles, the practices, what makes it work, and the benefits, which are proving to be beyond our expectations. Organizations who are doing intelligence swarming well find pretty amazing benefits in terms of employee engagement, job satisfaction, customer engagement, customer satisfaction, productivity. It's quite amazing the results that Cisco and BMC and Red Hat have experienced as a result of moving to a collaboration model. The third one is communities, social networks, and support. So this is about the intersection of customer support and communities and social networks. And we've developed 3 tenets around this and a journey map. It's a maturity model, things to consider. A list of do's and don'ts. There are some things you can do in engaging in communities and social networks that actually are not scalable, that would be a mistake, and there are other ways to leverage them that really actually help you deliver a better experience for the customers and also understand the customer experience from a broader perspective by paying attention to communities and social network. The fourth one is the Customer Success Initiative. This is probably the newest collection of conversations. Underneath this, or within this initiative, is the Predictive Customer Engagement Model. I'm going to show you some details on that because that that conversation and that work has gotten a lot of interest from the members over the past year, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about that. And then the last one, which we've been working on for quite some time, is the Leadership Framework for Service Excellence. So the assertion we have is that support is really a network. It's a network of content and people. And KCS helps you capture that content and reuse it. And intelligence forming helps you create relevant connections between people. We want to use content to solve known, and we want to connect people to solve new in a collaborative model. And the leadership implications of that, of leading and influencing a network, are quite profound. The principles and practices, leadership principles and practices for a networked organization are different than they are for a hierarchy. So one of my favorite provocative sayings is the hierarchy has outlived its usefulness, and that we would be better served by thinking of the organization as a network of people and content, and that has certain implications. So the work on the leadership framework has been going on for a few years now, and we typically focus on elements during the executive summit, but also the board of directors spend some time thinking and talking about these ideas. I will show you just a little bit on the leadership framework as well in terms of more detail. So events, I mentioned we've had 10 team meetings this past year, so on a variety of different topics, KCS adoption and success in the Evolve Loop, which I mentioned. KCS measures, there's a new framework emerging, or maybe I should say an improved framework emerging around measurements. Measurements is a constant challenge. And we continue to learn from the members on their experiences, and we have been working on how to organize the measures in a way that is meaningful and makes sense, because there are an awful lot of them. There are a lot of things you can measure, and so we've been working on a framework to help organize that. The Customer Success Initiative, we held a meeting in Massachusetts where we talked about, I think most of this conversation was on the predictive customer engagement model. Heard from some of the members on what they're doing and actually improved the model or progressed the model through that meeting. We find that these ideas are always iterative. That is, the process of innovation is seldom, if ever, a big bang. And so in the team meetings, we iterate on these topics. It's always a process of improving our learning and our perspective and how we articulate some of these things. We did a town meeting in Andover, Massachusetts in July. More work on the adoption and success. This was the first European team meeting in Amsterdam in June. Intelligence forming in Raleigh that was hosted by Red Hat, which is pretty active in the intelligence forming area. We did a joint session with ISIP, the ISSIP, which is essentially an academic association. We got together with some of the academics that are their members and some of our members and talked about data science and some of the concepts there, because data science becomes a very important part of our ability to be predictive. It's also an important part of our ability to manage people profiles and make intelligent connections between people. KCS Adoption and Success in Phoenix, hosted by Apollo Group. More on KCS version 6, the evolution, and then Communities and Social Networks in Austin back in January. So quite a few different events. Each one of these, for those of you who are members, is a link to the wiki. And you can look at the notes in the presentations, and Kelly often does a 5-minute summary or overview as a video and slideshow, voice and slideshow after the team meetings, and those are all available on the wiki. So that's what we've been up to. So talking a little bit more about the Customer Success Initiative. So this conversation I think started 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago now. And the question that came up in the leadership committee meeting, was how do we provide information that we have that customers would value but they don't know to ask us for. So through KCS and self-service, we're pretty good at responding to customer requests for assistance and finding the right knowledge or enabling them to find the right knowledge to answer a question. But there's an opportunity to provide information that we have that they would value without them asking. And so this really represents a pretty delicate balance between being helpful and being annoying. And I know across the industry over the years, there have been numerous attempts at proactive services and proactive support, and it's hard to do. So the challenge is predicting the customer needs and interests based on their recent behavior and knowing a lot about the people. So we've developed a model, because that's what we do, that talks about events. And so events can be generated by people. Events can come from systems or devices, and that's has become known as the Internet of Things. And they could be generated by environmental events like hurricanes and earthquakes and things like that. So when we talk about events, the source of events is from many different sources. And those events come through, we become aware of those events because they come through one of the listening points. And we've used this matrix that is Michael Wu's work. Dr. Michael Wu, who's the chief scientist at Lithium's done work with us over the years, and he developed this model that down this side of the matrix is the touch points, customer touch points. So is the customer investigating whether or not they want to buy a product? Have they already bought a product? Are they in the use cycle? Are they looking for support? Are they looking for references? So all of the touch points in the customer lifecycle are down the left side of the matrix. And then across the bottom is all of the different channels by which they can interact. So they could be reading a brochure, they could be talking to somebody face-to-face, they could be in the online community posting a question, they could be on your website looking for information about how to use a product. So there are many, many different channels by which they interact, and they do that at different points in the life cycle. So knowing that, where they are in the life cycle and what channel they're interacting through, it can be very helpful in terms of understanding their intent and deciding what they need. So all of these events go into what we're calling the black box, and the black box has I'm going to talk a little bit more about the black box, but it has the data repository, it has the analysis and the rules, and then out of that it drives actions or suggestions, which in turn go back through the communication mechanisms based on where they are in the life cycle and what channel they prefer, and go back to either invoke actions or recommend actions back to the source of the event. So this is what we're calling the event loop. We love the double loop process because it's self-correcting and continuous improvement is inherent. So there's a event loop and an improve loop as part of this model, which is probably familiar to most of you, the double loop process. So the trick here is what's inside the black box. And so the first thing we did was identify some data assets or knowledge assets. And each one of these becomes very complex very quickly. So the vendor offerings, we'll start here, there's a list of the products and services and their attributes and features that you sell as a vendor. People profiles is a very rich collection of data, some of which is manually entered, but most of which is inferred based on people's behavior and past experience and the content they're associated with. So people profiles, we've identified 5 elements of people profiles, and that's your identity, who you are, telephone number, email address, how to contact you, language, time zone, all those kinds of things that are fairly static. Interests, which are self-declared. I'd like to know more about networking. I'd like to know more about databases. I'd like to know Java. Skills, which in some instances today is self-declared, but there's some challenges with that. Our vision, our dream is that people's skills will be inferred from the content they interact with. And so this becomes a very rich profile of what people are likely to know about. So let's see, identity, interest, skills. Then there's reputation, which is what people have, the value, the history of value creation what people have created with their skills. So there's a difference between what you know and the value you create with what you know. So what you know is kind of your credentials, and the value you create is your reputation model. It's what others have received in terms of value. And that too is, we believe, has to be largely inferred from people's behaviors. So now I'm forgetting one. So there's identity, there's interest, skills, reputation. Well, I'll think of it. So people profiles gets very complicated very fast. Knowledge articles, this is stuff we know about, that we've talked about for years. It's created by KCS, but also could be documentation or other sources of knowledge. And then customer entity, so this is the business entity, information about the customer, what business they're in, what people are associated with that customer entity, what products they have installed, so install base is part of the customer entity, which immediately takes it to a level of very high complexity. And then worker tasks. So the degree to which we can make associations between these data assets. If this person is calling, and we know that they're related to this customer entity, and they're associated with these products in that customer entity, and in the past 6 months they've been associated with this work or task, then we can begin to infer some very interesting things about what they're doing, their intents, and what they might need to be successful. So those are the data assets, and each one of them, as I mentioned, has a pretty deep level of complexity associated with it. So those form the foundation of the black box. So that's the data layer. So there's 4 layers to the architecture for this black box. The second layer is analysis. So, and the analysis includes making those associations. Can we determine who's associated with what in terms of each of the 5 sort of domains of data that we're working with? Then there's a rules layer that says, based on the analysis, what should we do? So this is the layer that makes recommendations or suggests actions. And then at the very top layer, there's a presentation layer, which is, so how do we help people visualize this data? And in the program team meeting in Boston on the predictive customer engagement model, we saw a pretty impressive prototype of a system that EMC is working on to give their customers a view of their system performance. And while it doesn't use all of these data assets, it does use a number of them, and then does some analysis, has some rules, and then presents it in a very nice visualization way. So this is where I think the role of the data scientist comes into play, is helping, particularly with the data collection, associations and analysis, and rules, these 3 layers. There's a lot of science and tools that are emerging that help us do each one of these layers, or help us manage each one of these layers. So this is, I think, will be a focus for next year in terms of continuing to work on this. A number of the members, EMC, PTC, Cisco, I can't think of who else I know I'm missing some, have significant efforts underway to really get this black box to work. And the initial approach is to use the event loop in a fairly manual way to get some experience with it, and then from that experience make it programmatic so that it can scale. So the event loop is the A loop, and then the improved loop is the B loop, and there are certain activities that have to go on around impact assessment, engagement assessment, asset quality, rules effectiveness, analysis effectiveness. So this is a continuous improvement loop, which I think also would include what we've traditionally called a KDE, along with some math expertise that you would typically find in the data scientist. So that's the work that's going on under the Customer Success Initiative under a subheading of Predictive Customer Engagement. The other thing I wanted to spend just a little bit of time on is the leadership framework for service excellence. And this is a model. It's, people process technologies is kind of a common way to organize a business model. We've expanded that a little bit in that we talk about the business model, which is the company strategy, people, which is how you think about people, not just your employees, but also partners and customers. Process, so the business process and then the technology and infrastructure you use to support that process, to support people in doing the work to accomplish the business goals. And then in the middle, which helps drive everything, is the measures. And as I mentioned, we're doing quite a bit of work on the measurement framework within KCS. This is all based on a foundation of some organizational principles of engagement, transparency, reputation, and interaction. And those are kind of the emerging principles of the organization as a network. It's all about the ability to engage people, transparency, and the people have to have visibility to what the strategy is and to the work that needs to be done. Reputation, which is, again, part of the people profiles, which is who's creating value. And then interaction or collaboration, you could put collaboration there. That in fact it's the interaction between people that creates knowledge and converts new issues into known. So, and all models have some inherent flaws, but we found this to be helpful in organizing how we talk about the leadership framework because there's a section on each one of these areas. And one of the sections that we've been working on is the strategy, where most organizations, their business strategy is to move to higher value services. So how can we create, through our products and services and our interactions, our engagement with customers, how do we create more value? And so in past calls, we've talked about the value models and the concept of value erosion and the concept of value add. And then that led us to a conversation around what we're calling the value stack. So the value stack is meant to represent this increasing value realization by customers. So at the very bottom, in the smallest part of the stack, is the break-fix business, which is where many of us have been for a long time. The next layer is the predictive and preemptive, and so that's what we were just talking about with the the events and the analysis and recommendations that come out of a collection of events over time. Can we tell customers about things that they would value but don't know to ask us for? So fix is reactive, predictive and preemptive is more proactive. And then the next layer in the stack is customer success and productivity. So to what extent can we help customers be more successful in their business? Not just more successful with the tools and services they have engaged with us for, but in their against their actual business goals. And then, oops, sorry, wrong way. The ultimate goal is, can we help customers be successful? So each one of these, as you move up the stack, implies a greater level of value realization on the part of the customer. And a number of the members have had a fair amount of activity around defining services, at least in the first three. I don't know of too many that are actually focused on the customer success yet, but certainly in the first three. And some observations we've made about what it takes to get there or to be successful in helping customers realize that level of value. There are four things that are key dependencies. And one of the first, perhaps a foundation, is trust. So the level of trust the customer has in us as a vendor is an enabler or an inhibitor to their willingness to let us know enough about them in order to do the analysis, in order to be predictive, or in order to really focus on helping them be successful in their business. So we've had, at the leadership level, we've had quite a conversation in the last year about trust, both within the company and between companies and their customers, and how critical that is. Trust is one of those things that it takes months, if not years, to build, and then seconds to lose. As soon as someone's integrity comes into question or their stated intent is different from their behavior, it can destroy months or years of work in building up trust. So it's a fairly delicate, it's a fairly fragile thing. The second factor that's a dependency here is business acumen. So how much we know about our customers' business, not just about the products, our products that they use, or about our products, but our products in the context of how it's helping them be successful and how they use it. And I think for years, Intuit has been known for hiring accountants and then training them on the QuickBooks products and things, especially their level one. They have always focused on business acumen as the first requirement, and then the technology or the tool as somewhat incidental to that. We're seeing more and more members actually put a concerted effort into training their support agents or support engineers on the various businesses that they support so that they better understand the context in which their customers are using products and services. The third one is the co-creation factor. And this is a concept that was introduced by a couple of academic fellows who wrote a book called Service Dominant Logic. They're marketing guys, and they recognized some time ago, the second edition of the book just came out a few months ago, Service Dominant Logic. They recognized that in a product dominant logic where you're making physical things, that's a very different thing than a service dominant logic where everything is abstract, where you're really working to build trust, you're building influence, you're building confidence, you're building referenceability. Those things are pretty abstract compared to building toasters or TVs or cars. And so they wrote a book some time ago that highlighted this idea that in services as a business, the value realization is always a result of something the customer does. That the value realization in a product industry is often inherent in the product, and while the customer has to use it, their role is pretty small. In a service world, as you move up the value stack, the co-creation factor becomes richer and richer. That is, customers have to be part of the process in realizing that value. And we've heard stories from a couple of different members. They've created some tremendously attractive, high-value services. They look great on paper, but they can't get the customers to buy them. Because often the role a customer has to play in that service is not feasible or isn't worth the effort, or a variety of reasons. But the fact that the value realization is as much a customer role as it is the vendor's role, says customers have to be part of the design process. If your customers aren't present when you're designing your services, if they aren't part of that conversation on a regular basis, and you're trying to design services that are up the value stack, the likelihood they'll be well received and purchased by customers is very small. The service can sound outstanding, but if it's not feasible from the customer's point of view, they're not likely to buy it. So having them part of the design process for your services, your policies, and your processes as it relates to the service business is a critical dependency. We're playing with the idea of building a customer presence index that would help companies assess where they are with respect to how much of a voice does the customer have in creating high-value services. The last one is the know me factor. And this comes into play in a number of different areas. It's very much a factor in swarming. It is the people profiles that enables. That's what makes intelligent swarming intelligent. You have to know a lot about the players, the people involved in these high-valued services, both your employees as well as your customers, and quite often partners and consultants in this space as well, become important players in this. So the know me factor is knowing a lot about people, a lot about their interests, their intents, their role, their skills, their history of value creation, all of those things that we talked about as part of the people profile. So those 4 things. So in fact, we just heard in the recent team meeting, one of the members was talking about it was in the predictive customer engagement. The question was, how do we get the customer to do their part? Because they were working on some predictive processes and making some recommendations to the customers, but the customers would not take action on it, which is a great example of these 4 factors. You know, do the customers trust you? Were they involved in the design of the process and the systems and the services? Is it in the context of their business and what they're trying to accomplish? And do you know enough about them to make these things really relevant? And I think that's, you know, we mentioned the challenge earlier of the balance between being helpful and versus annoying, and relevance is the key in that. Some very interesting implications for the organization in terms of what we focus on in order to enable customers to realize more value from their relationship with us. So, upcoming events for 2016. We're doing a web session. We have a number of web sessions tentatively scheduled for the first 6 months. I think the only one that's really confirmed right now is this communication effectiveness. One of the things that's emerged as we talk about the measurement model for KCS is that we have for years had the AQI, which is the Article Quality Index. And that reflects how well people are adhering to the content standard, which is one of the 4 practices in the Evolve Loop, content health. Another practice in the Evolve Loop is leadership and communication, but we've never really talked about or formalized any measurements around how effective is that. And we've had little bits and pieces of activity over the years. We had one member some years ago do a study. They did a lot of things in the adoption of KCS. They put a lot of effort into communicating what it was, the what's in it for me, all of the things that we propose in the adoption guide. And then did a survey to assess how well that message was getting across. Do people understand what KCS is and why we're doing it and what's in it for them? And they were appalled at the results, because it turned out, in spite of all their effort, the message had gotten filtered or lost or diluted as it made its way to the people actually doing the work. So since then, a number of other members have done some interesting things around this. So adding a measurement element to each of the practices, like leadership and communications, is an important part of the V6 measurement framework. So the web session, that's a long introduction to this web session. The web session will be hearing from some of the members on what they're doing with respect to communication effectiveness. And it's most often a survey to assess people's understanding of those things I mentioned earlier. So we're also working on business value indicators that are also part of the leadership. So these are the high-level outcomes that you would expect, the benefits you would expect from KCS, from implementing KCS. And that will be part of the leadership and communications practice. In the process and integration practice, which describes essentially the solve loop and the workflow, we've identified a number of indicators that tell you whether or not people are adhering to the workflow. And then in the performance assessment, of course, we've had the radar charts on who's creating value. So in version 6, we're going to update each of the practices with a list of indicators that tell you the health of that practice. And again, for years we've had AQI, that's the article quality. There'll be one for the process integration indicators. We'll update and reinforce the performance assessment model with the assessment of who's creating value. And then for the leadership and communications, we'll have the business value indicators, which are the outcomes, and the communication effectiveness. So that's one way we're kind of organizing some of the experiences we've had over the last couple of years with KCS adoptions. That conversation we will continue at the February meeting in Phoenix, hosted by Apollo Group. The other big change in KCS version 6 is making it generic, talking about the KCS practices independent of an incident or a case. And Apollo Group is, I think, one of the leaders in adopting KCS in environments where they don't work from cases or incidents. And interestingly enough, one of the most successful groups at Apollo is the legal community there. They've embraced the principles of KCS and practice the capture in the workflow and delivering compliance and legal information through a self-service model that has been hugely successful for them. So then in March, so the team meetings, so February, KCS V6 is a team meeting. Those are 2.5 days. They usually go all day the first day, all day the second day, and then half day the third day. It's usually actually Wednesday, Thursday, and half day Friday. We're going to do a team meeting in March, and this is a new topic that just came up over the last couple of months, and we talked about this at the leadership committee meeting and really put some definition around it. But it's, what does a global multi-channel support strategy look like that promotes a consistent and high-value customer experience? And so we will be launching this conversation in Richardson, hosted by Cisco, in March. And the initial scope on this is that this, like the data assets, gets complicated very fast. There's localization, translation, there's multi-channels, there's different levels of service entitlement, there's cultural issues, there's just time zones. There's just a number of interesting things to consider. There are cultural preferences on how people engage and interact that are different in different parts of the world. So that should be a very interesting conversation. That in March will be very exploratory and the very beginnings of building that framework. In April is the annual member summit. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in Orlando, Florida. In May, we're doing a check-in on the social media and support model, I think hosted by Salesforce, which has an outstanding social media monitoring center and have integrated that into their business processes and lots of activity they do and monitor through social channels. In June, we'll be in Copenhagen. That is fairly definite, but not totally confirmed yet. That'll be in Europe, and KCS Success and Intelligence Swarming conversation. And then also in June in Boston, doing some more work on the Know Me factor and people profiles, because it has implications for both intelligence swarming and the predictive customer engagement. This idea of people profiles keeps coming up from different perspectives. So I mentioned there are 5 elements to the people profiles. It's identity, interest, skills, preferences, and reputation. And the one that I missed, I think, earlier was preferences, which is how people prefer to interact. Hit me on Twitter, send me an email. I prefer to telephone, things like that. So those 5 things, again, are identity, interest, skills, preferences, and reputation. And so that's what we'll be talking about in June in Boston. The Member Summit. So we don't frequent the same location for our summits, with a few exceptions. And the Villas of Grand Cypress in Orlando is one of those exceptions. I think this will be the 5th time we've been there in the last 12 years. One, it's a great location, great airport. It's 25 minutes from the airport, and it's the right size for us. It's hard to find resorts, nice resorts that have meeting space that that aren't 1,000 rooms, which we tend to get lost in with our 70 or 80 attendees for the member summit. So we'll be back at the Villas at Grand Cypress in Orlando, April 19th to the 21st. This is the launch for KCS version 6. Whatever state it's in at that point in time, we will declare good enough, and then work on iterating on some of the ideas as time goes on. But so April is the launch date for version 6. And we'll cover, as part of the meeting, what's new. We'll also share some case studies from some of the members on maximizing the benefits in the KCS adoption experience. One thing that's emerged is creating a center of excellence for larger organizations, creating a KCS center of excellence that really manages the adoption. Apollo and Ericsson are two groups that have done that. And then there's a transition from as groups evolve on the journey, then they move from being focused on the adoption team to being focused more from an operational point of view, or what we typically call the KCS Council. And there's some interesting transitions in that are pretty critical to sustaining success. One of those is that the first and second line managers have to take ownership for the success of KCS. You need a strong adoption team to get it started. It takes a lot of energy and effort because it's a pretty significant change for most organizations. But if the managers don't, over time, view the success of KCS and people's behavior, particularly around the solve loop and understanding the content standard, if managers don't take responsibility for their folks' performance and behavior in those areas, you cannot sustain it. And so we've had a number of conversations over the last 2 years, probably, around the role of the first and second line manager as being critical in sustaining and maximizing the benefits of KCS. So we're going to focus in this, in the member summit, on a little bit more than we have in the past on the role of that first and second line manager and how critical that is. And then measuring for success. So I've talked already a little bit about how we're working on improving the measurement framework. And so that will be part of the agenda as well. So that's the big thing. The next big thing is the 2016 Annual Member Summit. I think it's our 22nd summit. Does that sound right?
Yep, I think that's right.
So, some resources that are available. So the website, excuse me, serviceinnovation.org has a summary of all 5 initiatives under our work. It has an events page where you can go to the link to the Eventbrite registration pages for each of the events, and the YouTube channel. The wiki, which is for our members, is kind of our work in progress area, and there's a ton of great stuff out there. It's organized by event, but there is a search capability that's pretty good. And it has presentations and notes from all of our meetings for many years back. As those notes and conversations become more formalized, then we publish them in like the practices guide or in a paper, white paper, which then is available to the public. Right to use as attribution, but the stuff in the wiki is for members only, and it's kind of the work in progress. KCS Academy, which is the organization we created to do certifications for people and verify products and tools and services that support KCS, is a separate website, thekcsacademy.net. And we continue to have quite a bit of activity on KCS certifications for people. And I think there are now 4 KCS verified tools or products on the KCS verified page. And there's 6 or 8 KCS aligned tools or services. So verified, to get verified, you have to demonstrate that you have a broad set of functionality to support all the practices of KCS. to be KCS aligned, you really only have to demonstrate that you support success with one practice or two practices. So the verified is pretty intense. The aligned is more lightweight, and it might be, if somebody has a great measurement dashboard or something, or I'm trying to think of what there's. David Kay has an adoption service that's up there, and Clever has a KCS or a knowledge culture survey that they offer as a service. So there are 6 or 8 aligned tools or services that complement the KCS verified products in helping people be successful with the KCS adoption. Probably most of you know about these, the KCS resource, the practice guide, the adoption guide, the measurement matters, lots of case studies. We just did one recently on HP Enterprise. Hewlett-Packard Enterprise used essentially some evolved loop techniques to assess and improve customer success and use of self-service with some pretty dramatic results. And then the KCS Academy. So again, all of these, when you get the deck, all of these are links. So the Academy offers KCS Practices V5, which is the master level. You have to have a very thorough understanding of the KCS practices. KCS Publisher, which is for support analysts, really focused on the solve loop and the things the analysts need to know. Support Coach, which is all about influence skills and the process of coaching. The KCS Trainer, which is gives, if you get certified as a trainer, you get to use all the training materials that we've developed over the last 15 years with the exercises and things, the workshops, and then the KCS verified and aligned. And I think that's it. So, questions, comments? Well, if no one has any comments or questions, then I think we'll adjourn. So I hope you all have a happy holidays and a good New Year's. And we look forward to seeing you at a Consortium event in 2016.